If this profound sense of dislocation, this terrifying struggle to find meaning and identity after everything you knew has been violently wiped away, resonates with the quiet despair in your own heart, I ask you to do one small, crucial thing before we proceed. Share this vulnerable reflection on trauma and resilience with one person you know who is currently searching for their purpose after a catastrophic loss. They call me the survivor now, the builder, the one who walked with the divine in the time of profound wickedness, the singular vessel of continuation. But I tell you, the physical flood did not last 40 days and 40 nights. It lasts in my soul until this very moment, a constant internal deluge of memory and fear. What truly broke me, what cracked the foundation of my spirit, was not the sound of the water falling in judgment, but the terrifying, suffocating silence of the water rising over everything I knew. Every familiar face, every memory, every single landmark, every human voice that was not trapped inside those wooden walls with me. The world you see now is ostensibly dry, capable of bearing fruit, but my heart is permanently waterlogged, steeped in the overwhelming, corrosive guilt of being the one left standing, the accidental recipient of grace. This crisis of my later years is not the challenge of external reconstruction. It is the utter, paralyzing collapse of the will to begin again, haunted by the absolute tangible proof that everything, your home, your efforts, your legacy, can be swept away in a single, indifferent, divine breath. I am now an old man, and my hands, which spent decades constructing a massive structure that defied all human logic, now tremble over the simple task of planting a single insignificant seed. I'm perpetually expected to be the foundational patriarch, the architect of the new world. Yet I'm utterly consumed by an existential question that mocks every effort I make. Why plant? Why invest the immense sweat, the terrifying vulnerability of hope, and the precious commodity of time into nurturing this tiny, fragile life when I know, with cold, terrifying certainty, precisely what the absolute cosmic annihilation of all life looks, sounds, and feels like? This profound knowledge is the permanent scar of the trauma, the inability to trust in permanence, in growth, or even in the simple, necessary stability of the horizon. My mind remains perpetually trapped in the claustrophobic darkness of the Ark, living through the chaos, while my body is forced to labor in this vast, empty, water-battered world, desperately trying to construct a reality it can no longer believe in. The deep emotional truth I constantly hide from my own sons and myself is the unrelenting, oppressive survivor's guilt. Every breath I take on this new, clean, empty earth feels like a profound, undeserved betrayal of the millions whose breath was extinguished. I remember the final look on the faces, not just of the wicked, but of the bewildered, the mundane souls who simply had nowhere to run when the endless waters breached the final, futile barriers. This memory is the millstone around my neck, constantly whispering that my own worth is less than the immense, unpayable cost of the salvation I received, making me an unworthy recipient of this second chance. This self-condemnation is the deep, spiritual exhaustion of my later years. It is a depression rooted not in personal, rectifiable failure, but in the overwhelming cosmic scale of the loss that I witnessed and ultimately failed to prevent for others. The world sees the Ark as a monument to my faithful obedience. I see it as a monument to the terrifying, isolating magnitude of the destruction I endured. My clear, defining purpose, which was once so beautifully singular, to build, to save, to obey the direct command, has evaporated completely, leaving me fundamentally adrift in a world without recognizable anchors. I was defined for an incredible period by the enormous, consuming task of the Ark's construction. Now the Ark sits beached high on the mountain, a decaying structure of irrelevant waterlogged wood, and I am merely an old man whose singular defining mission is devastatingly over. This is the crisis that plagues the mature soul after the great work is done, after the children leave, after the career ends, after the structure that defined you collapses. The terrifying question that remains is not what I should construct next, but who am I now that the enormous title that defined my utility is irrevocably gone? I am a builder without a current blueprint, a captain without a sea, a foundational ancestor with no reliable memory of his past world to reference, leaving me in a state of profound, debilitating, and paralyzing displacement. The terrifying, unshakable physical and mental legacy of the flood is the post-traumatic stress that constantly haunts my solitude. Sleep is a dangerous, almost forbidden act, as the dreams return me instantly to the chaotic, deafening roar of the waters, the despairing cries just outside the thick wooden hull, and the sickening, unnatural rocking that lasted for months on end. I wake up in a cold sweat, desperate to feel the undeniable solidity of the ground, yet perpetually terrified of the sight of rain, terrified of the simple, cyclical nature of the weather. This constant state of anxiety, this hypervigilance, makes the idea of simple labor or quiet domesticity feel utterly impossible. I am physically present in this new world, but my mind remains irrevocably trapped in the trauma, unable to access the internal peace that this second chance supposedly offers. My soul is fractured, perpetually prepared for an imminent devastating end, utterly unable to embrace the terrifying vulnerability of a hopeful new beginning. I am often compelled, for the sake of my sons and their wives, to maintain a rigid facade of quiet patriarchal strength, the venerable figure leading the prayers and initiating the first acts of husbandry. But this mask is immensely heavy. I must meticulously hide the truth that I often look at the world's empty, beautiful horizon and see only a giant, indifferent future sea waiting patiently to rise again. I fear deeply that if I show my sons the true, raw depth of my existential terror, they will also lose the necessary will to plant, the courage to hope, and the faith to build. This self-imposed necessity to appear whole, to be the unbroken, untainted link to the future, actively prevents me from processing the profound and necessary grief that would allow me to genuinely heal. I have successfully survived the world's end, but I am tragically failing the simple, persistent daily challenge of living after the end, failing to reconcile the hero of the ark with the traumatized, fearful man holding this seed. This deep, paralyzing fear of recommiso, this unbearable survivor's guilt, is a colossal burden that transcends the centuries and strikes at the heart of every mature soul who has had their life's established structure violently dismantled. You know the feeling, the terror of investing time, energy, and hope when the memory of total, absolute loss is so fresh and so real. But I promise you, this state of paralyzing fear is not the final chapter of this narrative. Do not allow the trauma of the past to steal the terrifying, fragile possibility of the future. Stay with me, because the profound, life-altering moment I confront this fear and find the quiet, fundamental purpose for rebuilding, the revelation that frees you too from the cycle of fear and guilt, is about to break through the clouds. The terrifying truth of the New World is that its monotonia is a form of exquisite torture after the high drama of salvation. We were heroes for a year, floating above the chaos, surviving the greatest event in human history. But now, that monumental story is over. The sheer, repetitive labor of subsistence, mucking out the animals, searching for dry firewood, trying to make the wet earth yield a single crop, has replaced the urgent, unifying purpose of construction. My identity as the builder of the ark is now tragically irrelevant. I'm simply a farmer, a father, a man wrestling with mud, and this profound downsizing of my spiritual significance is what truly broke my spirit. The world expects me to be a wise prophet, a king of the new beginning, but I feel utterly vacant. A temple desolated not by fire, but by the relentless, quiet apathy that trauma leaves behind. My self-worth, once anchored in a divine, unique mission, has dissolved, leaving only the crushing despair of the ordinary. The greatest difficulty in this second act is the inability to trust in the future. The memory of the annihilation is too real, too vast, too absolute to allow the fragile seed of hope to take root. Every small effort, the slow process of draining the swamp, the methodical gathering of meager provisions, feels fundamentally futile because I possess the complete knowledge that all human endeavor is ultimately temporary and vulnerable to cosmic reversal. This existential dread, this understanding of the precariousness of life, is a devastating form of depression. Why should I invest my soul, my time, my meager resources into creating a stable life for my sons when I saw with my own eyes the ease with which all stability can be nullified? This profound, paralyzing lack of future-oriented purpose has become the true wilderness I now inhabit, a landscape far more frightening than the sea of water that once covered the earth. I struggled desperately with the loss of the map of my own life. Before the flood, however wicked the world, I knew my place. I knew the land, the people, the landmarks of my identity. Now, everything is alien, formless, and intimidatingly silent. The familiar constellations are gone, the ancient mountains are reshaped, and the very ground beneath my feet is a mutable, treacherous mud. I am adrift, not on the water, but on the earth, unable to reconcile the person I was, the confident, purposeful builder, with the person I am now, a disoriented survivor struggling with basic direction. This feeling of profound dislocation, where the past is irrevocably gone, and the future is an empty canvas I fear to touch, defines the identity crisis of the survivor in maturity. I have lost the internal compass that once gave my life meaning and forward momentum. The emptiness is exacerbated by the unspoken guilt I share with my sons. We survived, but our survival is defined by the absence of everyone else. We never speak of the ones left behind, the millions of voices we heard as the waters rose, but their absence is a suffocating blanket that smothers any possibility of genuine joy or unburdened peace. We are a family of ghosts, compelled to populate an empty world while simultaneously mourning the one we lost. And this emotional compression is what has led to my profound psychic weariness. I find myself retreating from the necessary tasks of the day, seeking the dark corners of the tent, craving the oblivion of sleep, anything to silence the persistent internal memory reel of the disaster, which plays over and over, demanding that I acknowledge the unpayable debt of my own salvation. My profound exhaustion is not merely physical labor. It is the sheer mental effort of carrying the weight of collective trauma and future anxiety all alone. I am the sole repository of the memory of the world before, and the only human link to the world after. My family looks to me for unwavering faith, strength, and the clear vision for the path ahead. But the truth is, I am utterly broken by the burden of being the unbroken one. I have no living peers to share this immense psychological weight, no elders to offer counsel, and no one who can truly understand the sheer magnitude of the loss that defines my every waking moment. The role of the unshakable patriarch is the ultimate mask, concealing a man who is terrified of the next cloud, terrified of his own profound insufficiency. The tragedy of this second act is the realization that my previous purpose was finite. The arc was finished, and with its completion, the core meaning of my life dissolved, leaving a terrible vacuum. I am forced to define a completely new purpose, one that is slow, mundane, and lacks the spectacular unifying drama of the flood. It is the crisis of the high achiever who suddenly finds themselves in the realm of the ordinary, and the ordinary, after the magnificent, feels like a cruel form of spiritual demotion. I desperately missed the clear, direct command, the singular focus that defined my worth. Now, I face the terrifying ambiguity of self-determination, trying to find meaning in a life that feels both profoundly unnecessary and terrifyingly significant. My friends, if you recognize this crushing burden, the exhaustion of having survived a catastrophe only to face the silence of the aftermath, the fear of planting new seeds when your past has been destroyed, then your journey with me is just beginning. This navigation through the trauma of total loss requires a radical shift in perspective. Do not turn away now. The moment I finally confront this profound emptiness, the moment that reveals the simple, quiet wisdom necessary for building a sustainable future, is the revelation you have been waiting for. The heaviest burden I carried off the ark was not the fear of the future, but the immediate crushing need to sustain the mask of the righteous survivor. I was the single moral justification for the world's survival, the proof that humanity was worth saving. This identity required absolute piety, unwavering composure, and the complete suppression of my own profound grief and trauma. I was forced to be the unbroken link, the pillar of hope, the patriarch whose faith never wavered, even as I secretly relived the chaos of the waters every time the wind shifted. The price of this impeccable public mask was the total denial of my necessary human right to mourn. I sacrificed my emotional health for the stability of the new world, believing that if the father of the new beginning broke down, the entire enterprise would surely collapse into despair and chaos, confirming the destruction had been total after all. This sustained emotional deception led to a catastrophic internal fissure. I had no framework for processing the guilt of living when everyone else perished, and the continuous demand to act as the perfect moral compass left me spiritually depleted. I confess that the incident with the wine was not a casual mistake. It was a desperate, panicked act of self-medication, a conscious attempt to force temporary oblivion upon a mind perpetually tormented by the images of the flood. I sought not pleasure, but profound numbness. The alcohol offered a brief, seductive respite from the relentless internal sound of the rising water and the suffocating guilt that consumed my waking hours. It was a futile attempt to silence the internal accuser who whispered, "You are not worthy of this survival, and your efforts are too small to justify the price paid for your life." The true corruption of my identity was that I used my supposed righteousness as a barrier to authentic connection, both with my family and with the eternal. I feared that if my sons saw the broken, traumatized man hiding beneath the furs, they would lose respect and their fragile will to rebuild. The mask of the just man became a prison of isolation. This need for constant control, for projecting an image of unshakable sobriety and virtue, is the deep, familiar trap of the mature leader who has passed through a great trauma. You believe your duty is to be the rock for everyone else, and in doing so, you deny yourself the essential human need to be weak, to grieve, and to be held in return. This isolation, born of fear, is what ultimately made me vulnerable to my own desperate means of escape. My shameful public exposure while drunk became a profound, albeit painful, act of truth. When my son, Ham, saw my nakedness, he saw the raw, undignified truth of the man behind the patriarch, the extent of my spiritual and emotional fragility laid bare for the world to see. This moment of humiliation was the public shattering of the mask I had so diligently maintained for over 100 years. It was the unavoidable, necessary consequence of my emotional repression. I had tried to escape the trauma through the haze of the grape, and instead the exposure forced me back into the brutal clarity of my own moral failure, confirming my deepest fear that I was incapable of leading this new world with the purity of spirit required. The profound connection here is for all those in maturity who resort to escapes, be it chronic overwork, addiction, obsessive control, or emotional detachment. to manage the unprocessed grief and the anxiety of their second act. We try to numb the pain of loss or the terror of the recomezo, and yet the escape always leads to a deeper form of exposure and shame. I realized that my most significant failure on dry ground was not the drinking itself, but the preceding decades of refusing to truly mourn the old world and the lost identity. I thought building the ark and obeying the command was enough, but I failed to build the necessary space in my heart for the sheer magnitude of the loss. I carried the collective trauma of the world's end, but I had no one to share that burden with because I believed my singular survival obligated me to singular strength. This failure to delegate the emotional weight nearly destroyed my legacy through shame. My self-condemnation following the incident was immense, but it was the inevitable price paid for my long-standing, toxic, emotional dishonesty. The world demands the hero, but the soul demands the man. My task now, in my deep maturity, was to reconcile the hero who built the ark with the broken man who sought oblivion in a cup. A reconciliation only possible through radical, honest self-acceptance. This realization, that vulnerability is the necessary prerequisite for genuine purpose, is the key to unlocking the peace of your later years. If you recognize the profound cost of your own emotional repression and are ready to finally confront the grief that your escape mechanisms have masked, I urge you to join this journey toward authentic healing. Click the like button now to affirm your commitment to choosing vulnerability over numbing, and let us share the courage required to face the hard truths of our past. The nadir of my second life did not occur amidst the roar of the downpour. It occurred in the humiliating, stark silence that followed my shame in the tent. After the wine wore off, after the heavy silence descended between my sons and me, I was forced into a solitude far deeper and more terrifying than the loneliness of the ark. This was my true, dark night of the soul, not a battle against external judgment, but a confrontation with the complete, self-inflicted ruin of my inner peace. I crawled out of the tent and simply stared at the horizon. The emptiness was absolute. There were no familiar mountains, no ancient landmarks, no grave markers of my ancestors to give me geographical or spiritual reference. In that moment, I realized the full, paralyzing truth. The flood had not just cleansed the earth, it had completely destroyed the map of my identity. I stopped trying to build, stopped trying to lead, and stopped trying to use the chaotic memory of the ark to define my present virtue. All my efforts to escape the trauma through work or oblivion had failed, leaving me utterly exhausted and exposed. The sheer impossibility of the task, restarting the entire human project on wet, formless earth, finally crushed the self-reliant man I had pretended to be. My resistance, the part of me that desperately clung to the familiar patterns of the old world, finally broke. I surrendered not to a divine wrath, but to the crushing weight of incerteza, the profound lack of guarantee that any effort I made would matter or last in a world proven capable of total annihilation. My trauma demanded certainty, but the horizon offered only a terrifying, limitless void. This enforced stillness was the only path to clarity. When I looked at the vast, desolate landscape, I realized that my problem was not the water, but my constant attempt to mentally rebuild the old world's stability where no stability was possible. The trauma had frozen my spirit, preventing me from engaging with the terrifying, necessary reality of the new beginning. I was spiritually paralyzed by the profound knowledge of impermanence. Why plant a vine that might be swallowed by the next judgment? Why build a house that might be washed away? I had to concede that the only way forward was to fully accept the loss of the old world and the death of the identity that belonged to it. I had to let go of the rigid expectations of the past to embrace the terrifying ambiguity of the present. The moment of breakthrough came in the form of a gentle, persistent memory, not a thundering voice, the image of the olive leaf brought back by the dove. It was a subtle, almost insignificant sign of new life, yet it held more power than the entire roar of the flood. I realized that the Eternal had never promised me the permanence of the old world. He had promised continuity and new life despite the chaos. My crisis was a refusal to trust in this continuity, demanding a guarantee that was reserved only for the divine. The truth that healed me was that the life I was commanded to build was not guaranteed against future loss, but it was guaranteed by the presence of a covenant, a promise that was outside of my control and therefore outside of my failure. My self-condemnation, the guilt of the survivor, the shame of the drunkard, was a last-ditch effort to maintain control over my own moral status. By clinging to the guilt, I remained the central actor in the drama, but in the silence of the tent, staring at the formless earth, I finally let go of the self-appointed role of judge and penitent. I understood that the divine had not saved me to punish me slowly with guilt. I had been saved to live fully and without reserve, despite the trauma. The purpose of the catastrophe was to reset the moral compass of the world, and my purpose now was simply to live out the hope that such a radical reset was possible. This absolute confrontation with the reality of total loss is the key to escaping the cycle of trauma and fear in your own maturity. When your own flood, the loss of a spouse, the failure of a business, the ending of a long role, destroys your old map, you must surrender the futile attempt to rebuild the familiar past. You must embrace the terrifying new horizon and trust in the simple, non-heroic signs of continuity, the small seed, the daily bread, the quiet commitment to the present moment. The power to recommencer, start again, does not come from forgetting the trauma, but from acknowledging the loss and choosing to plant anyway, without the guarantee of harvest, simply because life demands it. If you are standing today on the wet, uncertain ground of your own life, overwhelmed by the silence and paralyzed by the memory of loss, know that you are at the crucial point of surrender. The solution is not more frantic action, but deeper trust. I urge you to take this moment to confront the memory of your greatest loss with mercy, not fear. Take one deliberate minute to simply close your eyes and acknowledge the pain, and share one word in the comments that describes the new life you are choosing to plant today, e.g., patience, joy, acceptance. The truth that finally broke through the paralyzing fog of trauma was the most non-heroic, yet fundamentally life-altering discovery of my later years. I realized that the purpose of my second act was not to build another ark, not to prepare frantically for the next catastrophe, but to embrace the terrifying, vulnerable task of planting the first vineyard. My value was no longer in surviving the immense, singular event, but in mastering the slow, repetitive, small acts of creation and nurturing that make life sustainable and meaningful. The divine had commanded me to be fruitful and multiply, a mandate that transcended the grand drama of the flood and rooted itself in the simple, mundane reality of the soil. The shift was profound. I moved from being the frantic architect of global survival to becoming the patient gardener of a fragile new hope. This insight liberated me from the toxic grip of my survivor's guilt. I'd been living as if my worth were measured by the scale of my achievement, demanding that my future efforts match the monumentality of the ark. But the new purpose was found in the simplicity. The purpose was in the feel of the cool, damp earth, the precise depth to place a seed, the quiet daily commitment to watch for growth. It was the realization that glory is in the consistent, manageable acts of hope, not in the spectacular escape from disaster. For a man who had seen the whole world destroyed, the greatest act of faith was the simple courage to plant one single seed, accepting its vulnerability while trusting its potential. My identity was redefined from being the man who survived to the man who believed in tomorrow. I understood then the profound, gentle irony of the command to be fruitful and multiply. It was not a grand strategy, it was an antidote to the trauma. The only way to combat the memory of total annihilation was through the relentless opposite action of total affirmation of life. Planting was the physical, therapeutic act of choosing hope over despair, committing my hands and my focus to something that required future time and patience. My purpose became about honoring the continuity of life, accepting that my destiny was to anchor the new world in the fundamental rhythms of sowing and reaping, rather than in the fear of the next deluge. My life's final meaning was to transform my terror into intentional, peaceful creation. The ultimate wisdom I gained was about trusting the covenant outside of my control. When the rainbow finally appeared, a soft, arching promise across the violet sky, it was not a reward for my perfection, it was a unilateral guarantee from the divine that the earth would never again be destroyed by water. This covenant freed me from the anxiety of the future. I no longer needed to carry the paralyzing fear of cosmic reversal, because the responsibility for the world's stability was no longer mine to bear. This discovery is vital for the mature soul. True peace is found in relinquishing the burden of ultimate responsibility and trusting in the larger, unshakable guarantees of life, be it faith, natural law, or profound love. This shift in perspective is the map out of the crisis for you, the soul grappling with the remnants of catastrophe and the fear of recomeço. Stop demanding that your new purpose arrive with the thunderous clarity of a divine command. The greatest purpose in your maturity is to embrace the dignity of the ordinary. Your most powerful act is the consistent commitment to simple, manageable acts of creation, nurturing a relationship, mastering a new skill, tending your small plot of life with deliberate hope. Your value is no longer in building the ark for the world, but in cultivating the vineyard of your own soul, transforming the trauma of your past into the rich soil for your future growth. I learned that the simple act of naming the animals and setting them free was my final act of spiritual surrender. I was letting the chaos go and allowing life to organize itself through its inherent simple design. My purpose became about honoring the small beginnings. I had to learn to celebrate the first tiny bud on the vine with the same reverence I once reserved for the closing of the ark's enormous door. The grand event is over. The subtle, profound work of sustaining meaning has begun. This is the truth of the resilient life. The trauma of the past is undeniable, but it does not dictate the possibility of the future, provided you are willing to plant your feet firmly on the dry ground and commit to the humble work of hope. I urge you to embrace the fact that your greatest victory is not having survived, but having the courage to plant. The purpose of your maturity is to be the living proof that life continues, beautifully and stubbornly, after loss. If this chapter has inspired you to find meaning in the ordinary and hope after loss, I ask you to commit to nurturing your own new beginning. Find this video and share it with someone who is afraid to start over, and let us use the wisdom of the ark to build a chain of renewed purpose. If you are standing on your own wet earth, overwhelmed by the wreckage of the past and paralyzed by the fear of investing hope again, then this is the map for resilience I offer, forged in the terror of the ark and the humility of the first vineyard. The initial, crucial step toward rebuilding your identity after catastrophic loss is to sanctify the space of loss. Before I planted my first seed, I built an altar. This act was not merely a ritual. It was a psychological and spiritual necessity. It was a conscious, public acknowledgement that the past was irrevocably gone, that the price was paid, and that the sacrifice was complete. You must do the same. Formally acknowledge the immense cost of your trauma, the lost marriage, the ended career, the departed loved one, before you can truly move forward. Stop trying to pretend the flood never happened. The map out of paralysis begins with honoring the depth of the void, Only then can you separate the past's pain from the future's potential, transforming the memory of the catastrophe into the very foundation of your new commitment to life. Secondly, you must embrace the profound, radical wisdom of the single seed. My paralysis stemmed from trying to build the next ark, a mission too vast and overwhelming for the post-trauma soul. But the command was simple: plant. Your emotional and mental energy in this phase of maturity is finite. Do not squander it on monumental anxieties about the next decade or the ultimate outcome of your life. Instead, focus entirely on the smallest, most consistent act of hope that is within your power today. This means starting with the one new relationship you can nurture, the one new skill you can master, the one small promise you can keep to yourself. The power of Recomeço is not found in the thunder of ambition, but in the quiet, manageable commitment to daily, disciplined creation. This focus on the small and the immediate is the therapeutic antidote to the crippling fear of total future loss. The wisdom of the ark is that trust is only possible when you relinquish ultimate control. I had to let go of my self-appointed burden to prevent the next disaster. The appearance of the rainbow, the covenant, was the external, beautiful proof that the stability of the world was now guaranteed by the divine, not by my continuous vigilance. This is your essential lesson. Your anxiety about future failure, the next flood, must be released, because the future's stability is not your responsibility. You are now free to focus entirely on the present work of planting, nurturing, and growing, without the paralyzing fear that your every effort might be futile. The power of the covenant is that it grants you the peace to love what you build today, even though you cannot control what tomorrow's weather will bring. You must choose to define your new purpose by continuity, not by catastrophe. Your life's value is not measured by the magnitude of the disaster you survived, but by the quiet, stubborn resilience you demonstrate in establishing the rhythms of a new life. Your legacy in this mature phase is found in the simplicity of your fidelity to the mundane. The ark was finished, but the vineyard needed consistent, patient tending, the slow, unseen work of pruning, tilling, and waiting. This shift from the spectacular to the sustainable is the very definition of mental fortitude after trauma. You must trade the addictive high of crisis management for the profound, deep satisfaction of watching slow, organic growth take root and flourish in the space where chaos once reigned supreme. Embrace the inevitable realization that your most profound scars, your moments of greatest shame and terror, like my incident with the wine, are the unique qualifications for your current role. Your capacity for empathy, your deep understanding of human frailty, and your wisdom concerning the dangers of escapism make you the perfect guide for those who are currently drowning in their own trauma. Stop viewing the trauma as a spiritual defect. View it as the pressure that refined your purpose. Your vulnerability about the pain of your past is the most powerful tool you possess for building genuine connection and trust in this new world. The final map out of paralysis is the continuous act of intentional, spiritual grounding. My survival was sustained by the simple pattern of eating, sleeping, and obeying the direct command. Your Recomeço must be built upon a foundation of intentional boundaries that honor your need for rest and quietude. Stop allowing the external world, the demands of family, the allure of busy work, to pull you back into the old rhythm of self-neglect. The strength required to plant after the flood is not physical but spiritual. The quiet commitment to show up every day, to tend the small things, and to trust that even in the midst of wet, uncertain ground, life's purpose will prevail. This map for transformation, the difficult journey from trauma to planting, is a life-altering truth that must be shared. We must use our collective vulnerability to affirm this new, simple purpose. I urge you to take this profound wisdom and begin the hard, necessary work of sharing hope. Visit the resource link in the description and share this monologue with one person you know who is currently feeling lost on their own wet earth. And let us turn the tide of fear into a collective act of planting. The final completion of my journey was not the monumental effort of building the ark, but the simple, profound act of choosing to stay and plant. As I look out now upon the fields I have tilled, the terror of the past has been replaced by the quiet, unshakable dignity of the present. I realized that my purpose was never to be the solitary architect of salvation, forever defined by the massive, finite event of the flood. My enduring purpose, my legacy in maturity, is to be the gardener of hope, the man who, despite witnessing the absolute annihilation of all he knew, still found the courage to put his hand to the plow and trust the slow, sacred process of growth. The peace I carry is the profound serenity that comes from accepting that the disaster was real, the grief was valid, but the continuity of life is stronger than the chaos of loss. This acceptance is the final, essential step in transforming the paralyzing trauma of the past into the quiet power of a purposeful future. I implore you to understand that your second act is not about finding a destination free of sorrow, but about building a life that honors the truth of your scars while committing fully to the potential of your present. The survival of the ark was the great event. The building of the vineyard was the great healing. You must shift your focus from the catastrophic failures you survived to the small, incremental acts of creation you can manage today. The fear of future loss will always whisper, but you must choose to answer with the sound of the seed being planted, the tangible, deliberate affirmation of hope over despair. Your resilience is measured not by how quickly you forget the water, but by the quiet, stubborn courage with which you commit to the dry ground, trusting the covenant of continuity that holds the chaos at bay. The ultimate wisdom I offer is that you are not defined by the size of your trauma, but by the simplicity of your commitment to recreation. I was the hero of the ark. I am the man who sought oblivion in wine. But in my final years, I am simply Noé, the man who planted the first vine. This is the profound redefinition of purpose for the mature soul, trading the exhausting burden of the grand title for the quiet, enduring dignity of simple, faithful labor. Stop allowing the grandiosity of your past to overshadow the profound necessity of your present. Your greatest contribution now is to be a living, breathing testament that life, however fragile, is fundamentally worthwhile, and that the greatest act of courage is the sustained, gentle commitment to showing up and creating meaning, one small, quiet day at a time. I look at the world now, and I see the beautiful, constant presence of the rainbow, the external, undeniable guarantee that holds the terror of the water at bay. This is your final lesson. Your peace is secured by the certainty of the promise, not by the strength of your own vigilance. You are free from the anxiety of ultimate responsibility. The only task remaining is the joyful, necessary act of living without reserve, planting your own vineyard and dedicating your remaining strength to nurturing the growth that you feared was impossible. Release the crushing burden of the survivor's guilt. Your life was saved not to punish you, but to liberate you into a new purpose, defined by gratitude and gentle growth. The completion of my journey involved finally allowing myself to grieve the world I lost, not by drowning my pain in wine, but by actively transforming the memory of the past into the foundation of a new future. I urge you to do the same. Consciously use the pain of your past failures and losses as the rich soil for your subsequent purpose. Do not view your scars as defects. View them as the credentials that qualify you to be the wisest, most empathetic guide for those who are currently overwhelmed by loss. The resolution you seek is not the erasure of the catastrophe, but the complete acceptance that the trauma was the difficult, terrible prerequisite for the peaceful, deeply purposeful life you are now capable of building. I ask you to embrace the final, liberating truth. Your life is now yours to live fully, without the heavy burden of having to justify your survival. The world needs the wisdom gleaned from your chaos. Do not hide in the tent of your past fear. Step out onto the dry earth and plant your first seed of hope, accepting that the act of planting is the truest form of prayer. Your purpose is to anchor the new beginning, not to fear the next ending. To complete this final, necessary journey to purpose and peace, you must commit to a vulnerable, concrete act of faith in the future. I ask you to plant your first small seed of hope today. Find a single small action you have been putting off out of fear of failure or loss, and commit to completing it within 24 hours. Leave a comment that states, "I am planting," the small act, and join this community of resilient hearts who choose creation over fear. Closing phrase, profound and final. The world called the wreckage annihilation. I call it foundation. Your life is not a countdown. It is the courage to plant anyway.